All right, it's that time again. Let's do our usual tests. Hopefully everyone's good. We've got Red Octane's in here, Chaz is in here, Big Grout. He laid a beat for us, so that'll be interesting to hear. Sharp Chaz, Ski Boy, as well as Harmiter. Welcome, guys. Welcome. As you can hear, a little bit stuffy still, but you know what? That's all right. Let me know if the mic audio is good. We'll run the first couple tests, and then we'll just get right into it, guys. Not too many submissions, so we should be able to get through them all. I think everyone's sort of busy with work and school and whatnot. So, yeah, it'll be a fun one. Everyone will get their beat heard. And, yeah, we'll get out of here soon. Moha's in here. Knowledge Life Moha. So let me know if the mic's working. I feel very sweaty. Hopefully by the end of this, my armpits are not drenched. Let me double check now. All right, we're still clean. So for now, I have not embarrassed myself. Yeah, let me know, chat, if the mic is good. Sounds good, says Sharp. Let's do our first. Am I still? Yeah, let's do the first test here. So let me know if that was coming through good, and if so, we will hop to it. So this was the sample that everyone had to use. So I'm going to play that first, and we'll take a listen to what you guys came up with. I will say, though, the sort of main priority here is to just make a good beat. Even though I might say, hey, that was a cool flip, I don't, it's coming through, says Grout, all right? But yeah, I don't want you guys to feel as if how crazy your flip is what matters most. It's always about making the best music. So, yeah, let's listen to the sample first. All right, lots of good pieces in that sample. So much usable material. I agree, Sharp. Such a good sample. That sure is a green island. It's a very paradise-looking place. I spent 2 weeks working on the beat. I realized I broke the rules. Uh-oh, is it the BPM thing that messed you up? Listening to that sample makes me want to flip it too now. By the way, I put out my first YouTube short today. Let me know if it comes up as a short or if I screw that up because I don't know how to post those. So hopefully I did that right. Anyways, let's start off by listening to Corbin's beat here. You can hear my boogers are starting to come out. So let's jump right into it. Here's Corbin's beat. Let me know what you guys hear. Give your own critiques as well. So let's see what Core A Beats did with this. All right, that was Corbin's beat there, Mr. Red Octane himself. Let's see here. Dandy, welcome. Good to see you here on your mobile phone. Ski says, love the sample, wanted to listen to more from the same artist. Yeah, he's, I think I've seen a couple of his other samples. He just used, it's just a great library music. It's just so much material to work with a lot of this type of sample. Ski says, love the work on the drums. I definitely agree. So with my takeaway with this beat, great job of bringing bits of variation throughout the entire beat, and paying attention to some of the smaller details I can sort of hear compared to where your beat started. You're starting to like pay attention to the smaller little sort of bits and pieces that you can add into your beat. So the sort of small little sample interjections, as well as the small rhythmic switch ups at the end of the loops at times. So that was really good to see. As well, I would say that great switch ups in the beat as well. The structuring of the beat was awesome, and when you did that switch up, it was very flawless. A lot of the times with switch ups, it can get very difficult to actually make it sound cohesive with the rest of your beat. I think you did a great job in making sure you had enough in that sort of switch up to keep a consistency, but you made enough difference in the beat where it actually sounded different. That's something that I always advocate for, and you did it really flawlessly here. So great job there. I liked the part of the beat with the arpeggiating vocal. That was a cool part of the beat. The other section of the beat, though, I will say it felt like there was nothing really up front in the beat when it's just the vocal being used more as a pad rather than an arpeggiating sound. And then you had the actual pad stacked as well in the beat. You basically just had the drums as well as the vocal sample in the pad. And to my point of depth, there was sort of nothing in between. It was just a very floaty feeling in the back, and then you sort of brought the drums to the front. And when you sort of arpeggiated the vocal sample, at least at that point, it added a bit of movement, and you sort of had something to pay a little bit more attention to. But during that section where the vocals were not arpeggiating, it felt like a bit floaty, and it wasn't sort of substantive enough. So in terms of how you might want to fix that, honestly, just bringing up the vocal, bringing up its volume, or reducing how much reverb, just to play around with its depth, just so it doesn't sit in the exact same part of the beat as that pad, because it's sort of blended in to the point where we didn't have much variation in depth because of that. And I think last time I mentioned, I was curious whether you added soft clipper and you did a little bit of compression on the master this time around, because I think that is also something that can really go a long way in making your beats just sound louder, in case that's something you want to work on. But yeah, great job here overall. I think I'm really impressed with how far you've come, especially with the structuring and the arranging of your beats. You do a great job in making sure there's enough variation and it all works cohesively, which is really impressive. And you're starting to pay attention to the smaller and smaller details, and you're doing a great job of that as well. So yeah, keep it up. It's just some of those small things you might want to look out for. And yeah, I'm curious to hear what you say about what you do on the master, because yeah, I think I remember we talked about that last time. Want to see if you actually did add some sort of compression or soft clipper. That's a common one that a lot of people go with. But yeah, let me know. Until then, let's listen to what Mohawk came up with here. right, that was Moha's beat there. Sharp says this is dope. One and only Jor says fire. Has some nice sounds to fill up all the spaces, in my opinion. Appreciate the feedback. We'll take some. So yeah, I'll address the master thing in a second. Hitting that spooky beat early. I love that drum effect on the sample. Drums are fire as hell too. Nice dark flip. The sample is made very robust. I love the drum rolls. K-Dot, that was Moha's beat. That was not mine. So yeah, with this beat, well, first let me I want to mention to Red Octane, I think I said it in the general chat that Ozone is giving away their Elements suite for free, and that's exactly what I use on my master. So like I mentioned during the actual process, I said this in the course, during the actual beat making process, I'll use Soft Clipper just to get a good idea of how the beat would sound with a little bit of compression. But at the end, what I will do is put on Ozone Elements and just use one of the presets. It's really, I don't really overthink it, but in terms of just getting your beat to sound a little bit more loud and for things to start to sound a little bit more gelled together, that can be a great way of doing it. And yeah, it's free right now. I think they said until October 25th, so that's tomorrow. So yeah, try that out, see if that helps as well, because the Soft Clipper, it only goes so far, and I think Ozone does just a great job of their mastering presets. They can really take your beat to the next level. So yeah, give that a try. I think it might be help in your situation if you want your beats to sound a little bit more loud. With Moha's beat here, I think this was a phenomenal beat. Great job of that sort of collage approach. There's just so much variation in terms of the different sounds and different pieces of the sample used throughout. It wasn't as if it was just the same sort of loop repeating over and over again. You sort of went in depth and made sure there's so many different parts and arrangements in this beat, and they're all so different, and yet they use the same pieces and they sort of work together still. So that was a phenomenal job there. I really loved it. I think my favorite part of this beat was that sort of reversed string or organ. I'm not sure exactly which instrument that was. That one sort of went upwards. That sounded really great to me. Like I mentioned, the structuring and the arrangement was great. You paid a lot of. This sounds like a beat where you can hear how much work has gone into this beat, and it really shows, because this is just phenomenal. I also want to mention that I loved the simple bass line, especially with how complex the sample work was in here. This sort of applies to the things that I talked about in the course, the idea of melodic variation. The sample was used in such an elaborate way, and there's a lot of movement with the sample, and so it's a smart idea to be a little bit more simple with the bass line at that point. Even when we use samples, those sort of same principles apply all across the board. So in terms of the melodic variation, that was very smartly done, so I want to say kudos to you on that. I can definitely see a rapper using this as well. This had enough to the point where you can hear that the beat has enough character, but there's still space for an artist to actually use it. Yeah, I think it's reverse strings. Yeah, it sounded like strings to me. Yeah, I don't really have much in terms of things that I might want to change with this beat. Yeah, I think it has a perfect amount of material in it for an artist to use. So I think, yeah, just all in all, I don't have any criticisms to waft there. That was a very well done beat through and through. So kudos to you. Let's listen to Mixter Mom's beat next. Well, that was over sooner than I thought it would be. So that was Mixter Mom's beat there. Let me quickly write this down. So Red Octane says that bass line is hard, very Cody-esque. Chaz says, I like this. So yeah, with his beat, I think really good structure here. If you guys remember, Mixter Mom would struggle with... Red Octane says, a little switch up variation would be nice though. The 808 sounds unstable to me. Love the atmosphere in the outro though, says Grout. I liked, but would like to hear more variation on the bass line. Love the blending of the samples. So yeah, with this beat, with Mixter Mom, they're doing a great job of actually getting their beats to sound more complete and upfront. If you remember, they struggled with like sort of quieter sounds. So it's great to see that continue. With the sample, so there's a couple of things that I think I would point out. For one, something like I think Grout mentioned, the 808 sounds unstable. I sort of caught something as well. I'm not 100% sure whether it's the 808 in isolation or it's the combination of the 808 plus that pad that Mixter Mom programmed in the background. I'm not 100% sure whether they are working together in terms of what's happening with the music. So, yeah, there's something, one of those layers is sort of not sitting right with the other layers. In terms of the string sample that they've used here, I would have liked to hear a little bit more variation in terms of just even something small as the velocity of the different samples, because they basically used it as a sort of repetitious one shot playing over and over again, and that's a great use of a sample. But I think just playing around with some level of variation, whether it's going to be the velocity or just sort of panning, adding a little bit of delay, just so there's a little bit more life into it. I think I heard a little bit of panning variation, but I think pushing it a little bit more would have been nice. Nonetheless, a really cool idea, like I mentioned, with that sort of sampling technique of just playing the same one shot over and over again. If it's not sort of melodically complex, it sort of allows you to play around with the other layers around it, and that's what Mixter Mom did with the 808 pattern. I think, as always, great job with the sort of smaller textures and the unique approach to the additional sort of percussive elements and whatnot. They always go the extra distance in terms of just adding unique textures and adding value to the beat in that way. I think the big thing is, just like Grout pointed out, there's sort of something in here that sort of isn't working musically speaking. I can't 100% identify what it is. I think it's like the last half of the loop. Maybe the 808 isn't playing the right note, or the pad isn't playing the right note. So you might want to go and tinker around with that. But yeah, I really liked some of the things in this beat. Really great approach with the sampling technique there. Is just the sort of small thing that sort of undermined the entire idea, unfortunately, it sounds like. Let's listen to Delago's beat next. Okay, that was Delago's beat there. Delago 96. Let me finish what I was writing here. All right, so with this beat, I really love the sort of sampling technique here, the sort of back and forth. It sounded like there was like a little bit of reversing happening, and just the constant striking of that sort of string section of the sample. That would have never occurred to me, so that was really cool to see. Just a really awesome approach. It worked really well as well. And to the sorry, that was gross. And to the point of my prior thing that I pointed out, it was a very sort of consistent sample in terms of the melodic sort of complexity of it. It wasn't jumping all over the place in terms of playing around, I think, multiple octaves, and so that sort of freed you up to do a little bit more. I would have liked to hear a little bit more variation in terms of how audacious the sort of bass line was, just because you had a lot of open room to be a little bit more expressive melodically. So you could take advantage of that with the 808, or if you wanted to introduce yet another sound in the beat, I think there's definitely room to do so. I really like the cool switch up in the beat. You paid attention to sort of the smaller the details in that regard, but I will say that with samples, it can be really difficult to create switch ups and different parts of or different sections of your beat, just because so much of the beat is sort of static in terms of you cannot overhaul. You can't create new notes with a sample. You're sort of stuck with what the sample provides you, and it sounded like the approach that you took with the structuring was a sort of straightforward, half time, drop the drums, and that's just something that I see a lot of when people choose to use samples, because it can be difficult to program out a different section. But Chaz, you are right. I am disgusting. But yeah, like Moha showed us with his beat, you can definitely accomplish it. So I would have liked to see you push a little bit harder and try to figure out how you can take the sample and create more variation that isn't just the sort of, drop the drums, halftime, call it a day type of approach. I think another thing that I will say is that this beat probably would have came together with a little bit more compression on the master. So I think I can just hear that the beat feels a little bit incomplete to the point where I think maybe a little bit of compression on the master could help just glue things together. And one other thing that I noticed is that the highs, I think in terms of getting the beat to sound a little bit more full once again, there's a little bit of presence missing in the high end, I think. The snare sample that you used was a little bit dull. The string sample, it sort of sat in the sort of mid range. I think the only sound that you had that was actually in the high end was the hi-hat, and it was a very sort of tiny, very transient hi-hat. It wasn't by any means something that filled up a lot of space in terms of how much time it played. So I think overall there's a little bit of presence missing on the high end. So just, bumping up some of the frequencies up there could have helped make this beat feel a little bit more complete. So just those small little things, but in terms of the actual production techniques that were used here, great work. It's just pay attention to the overall spaces like we talk about in the chorus. The sort of frequency space that was sort of missing a little bit was in the high end. And once again, I will say, see what happens if you play around with putting some mastering effects on the master, and see if that helps glue things together. Just because with that sample, it sounded like there was a tiny bit of reverb on it, but I think really putting compression on the master will really take those sort of quieter sounds and really boost them a tiny bit and level everything out to the point where things will start to come together and sound a little bit more complete, and like all the spaces are being a little bit more filled in terms of the depth. So yeah, cool idea there. I'm very impressed with your guys' flipping so far. There hasn't been a beat where it just feels like a poor attempt at flipping, so that's awesome to see this so far. Uh-oh. Mr. Sharp, your beat is not working here. Huh? Not good. Not good at all. So let's listen to Indominus Beats. Let's see what you got. All right. That was Indominus Beats. Was that the first time Indominus has submitted to the stream? I think it might be. Okay, Sharp, you changed the link, so I'll check that out again. Grout says, love the fat kick. Jor says, you guys are so good at sampling. Teach me your ways. There's a lot of impressive sampling here. This is nice, says MCI. The drum slap hard, says Ski. Sharp says fire as well. I can hear Styles P on this. Yeah, I feel this exact same way as you guys. So much of the space on this beat were filled by that sort of hard drum break. And I think that was a very smart thing to do, especially if you're not going to, add extra layers into your beat. If you're using a sample, making the drums as large as you can in terms of filling up enough space. As I mentioned in the chorus, in terms of the frequency space, these are just very colorful drums. As well, they aren't very short transient sounds. So if we compare this to the beat that we heard prior, how I mentioned the hi-hats were just very transient, very short. With this beat here, in terms of the drum textures overall, just very prolonged, very pronounced drums that just take up a lot of room in the beat. And at that point, it sounded like all All Indominus did after that was just use a sample in the bass line, and it was enough to make a full beat. And so that's an approach that you can think about when it comes to drum programming and filling up space in your beat. The bass line was nice with his beat, very melodic. It did just enough to create some nice variation in terms of building or introducing enough melodic variation into the beat. I feel like overall, just like Sharp mentioned, I could hear Styles P or some sort of 90s rapper on this. This felt very much like a 90s beat, and there's the production approach in terms of, having the hook have the sort of full sample and then minimizing and doing some filtering for the verse section. That's a very 90s style of beat in terms of the production technique. And I can definitely hear a rapper. This really reminded me of, in some ways, Paparazzi by Exhibit. I really, really love that beat. One small thing that you can think about when doing this type of style of beat and this approach is throughout that verse section when everything's sort of filtered down, just at moments throughout the beat, just unfiltering, just have like one short little half bar section. You take the filter off, or something else that was very popular was just take a stab and, a short stab that isn't filtered and just add a little bit of delay. Just like the sort of horn samples that were very popular in the 90s. I'm not saying it has to be a horn explicitly, but just taking some sounds and introducing them throughout the actual verse section, just so it isn't just sort of minimal sounding throughout, and you have a little bit of variation in terms of keeping things interesting, and you introduce a little bit more, frequency variation if you use different textures throughout the verse sample. But nonetheless, I think this is a great beat for someone to use if they want to do that sort of 90s style of song. I think this was a great blueprint to sort of approach or create that style. So awesome job, Indominus. Is that Indominus' first time submitting? I think it might be. Good start, if so. All right, that was Sharp's beat, "The Man Who Chooses Not to Read." Uh, the crowd says the sample sounds pretty thin. That's something that I wrote down as well. Great bounce on this one. The BPM's too fast. Eric says true. That's a great bass. Also something that I picked up on. It's 90 BPM. Jeez Louise. Yeah, so with his beat, I think there were a lot of things I actually really did like. But to Eric's point there, tempo is very important. It affects the feel. I think if you took this exact same beat and just slowed it down, it probably wouldn't have worked, just because it sort of requires that sort of faster paced energy for everything to sort of feel a little bit as full as it was. All these flips are good. Nothing boring, says Chaz. I agree completely. BPM speeding ticket. Sean felt it was slightly repetitious. So yeah, with this beat, I love the approach to the sampling once again, that sort of collage approach. You sort of isolated different pieces of the beat with a sort of strings hitting on the sort of far left and right, and then you had your more musical instruments sitting in the sort of middle, which were samples as well. The ones that are sitting left and right, they're very sort of repetitious, but that's not a bad thing, because that wasn't meant to sort of drive the sort of beat. That was more so a sort of rhythmic instrument in a way, whereas the samples that were sort of sitting in the middle sort of drove the idea a little bit more. But I will say, to Grout's point, it sounded like a little bit too much EQ reduction was happening there, especially in the lower frequencies. I'm not from the sounds of the original sample, I can't quite remember whether there were frequencies of those instruments that were down there, and you sort of chose to cut them off just to isolate them. But it sounded like a little bit too much was cut off, to the point where it wasn't as present and it didn't really fill up enough space, because it did feel like there was something missing in that frequency space, to the point of the latest video that I put out in the chorus. That sort of very common space that's missing in a lot of beats. I feel like that part of that instrumentation was missing, and sort of contributed to a little bit of incompleteness in the beat. Sean says he's sneaking in here at work. All right, Red Octane, it was good seeing you. Hopefully you catch the rest later. Yeah, so I got you. I tried to isolate it 3 times and layer it together. Yeah, it's if you sort of isolate, that's one of the difficulties with something that I mention a lot of the times, is that it can be hard to use samples that have a lot going on in them. When you try to use this sort of technique and you sort of try to isolate, this is one of the dangers, in that you sort of really narrow down the frequencies of an instrument just to sort of catch it in isolation. But unfortunately, once you put it into your beat, it sort of doesn't provide enough to get the beat to sound complete. This beat overall was pretty open, so even if you were able to just boost up the sort of lower frequencies of those sort of sounds, what I'm referring to is the sort of string sample that was sitting in the middle, as well as the sort of piano sample that you had here. I'm not sure whether maybe you played the piano. Was that part of the sample? I can't remember. But either way, I think just boosting up some of the high end of those sounds could have helped. But outside of that, I really, really loved everything in this beat. The bass texture was awesome, the sort of jazzier feel to it, and you had a nice sort of bouncy bass line, so that was awesome. I love the way you programmed it. The drum work was great as well. I love the sort of jazzy feel, the sort of I think there were sort of like rides in the drum break, as well as a nice, very integrated samples that you use. It sort of felt like everything came from the exact same break. Yeah, that was really phenomenal as well. But like I mentioned, if you just slowed this beat down, I think the way you programmed everything might not be enough. You probably had to get a little bit more complex with the drum break, as well as the bass line. But we'll just take it for what it is here. I think everything outside of the sample was great. And in terms of the sample, everything, you programmed everything really, really well. That's a very smart approach in terms of having the sort of strings on the far left and right be a little bit more monotonous, and then playing with the sort of musical phrases with the other sort of pieces that you used. That was a really, really awesome technique. It really, really worked well. It's just simply just the sort of frequency space of this beat felt a little bit off kilter in terms of that one space being missing. But other than that, awesome, awesome, awesome beat. And to the point of Sean, slightly repetitious. I think the way you used your sampling here, there was definitely room where you could have sort of played around with the size of the beat. I think you did to some extent, but just maybe pushing a little bit more further, and playing around with the different rhythms of your instruments, maybe taking an additional few pieces as well. I think that's an opportunity that was there as well. I think with that tempo, you'd have to go into more boom bap style with longer drums. In terms of the tempo of the beat now, or with the sort of 80 and lower, because with 80 and lower, yeah, I think with this sort of approach with what the beat was here, it would have to be a little bit more boom bap-ish. Next up, Geisha. Here we go. All right, that was Geisha's beat there. Let's put her in the color there. Sarek says, yeah, at 80 or lower, but we have a trap beat here, so there was an opportunity to do a little bit something different. But I guess hopefully you guys didn't infer 80 or lower being double time would be excluded. I didn't think of that. Yeah, but Grout says that goes hard as hell, says Sharp. Griselda could chant all over this. Geisha loves her reverb. I'm a big fan of reverb as well. I probably put too much reverb on my beats when I first started. It's a hard flip for sure. Yeah, boy, says Chaz. That wubby transition sound in there was cool. So yeah, with this beat, I think one of the things I want to point out here that was really, really smartly done, just to the point that we sort of talked about in the last beat, you can hear how Geisha programmed that additional piano underneath. So in terms of what part of the sample was used, it was the sort of mid, sort of a little bit in the higher spectrum. In terms of the frequency space, the sort of strings, that was the primary sound that was used in the sample. And so it's a very common thing to happen here where you just add your drums and your bass line and then there's just a huge gap missing. But what Geisha did here, which was really, really smart, was that sort of piano that sat underneath. So I will play it here again so you can hear. So you can hear that piano that sits underneath. So yeah, that really, really helped fill the space and helped the beat sound a lot more complete, which was a very good approach there. Just because you're using samples doesn't mean you're stuck with just a sample. You can always program your own instruments if there's something that's missing that you need to sort of include. I think with this beat as well, I really like the sort of I'm not sure exactly. I think Grout alluded to it, that sort of wubby transition there. That's a really cool little sound in there as well. I think with this beat, I would have liked to hear a little bit more variation. So to the point that I made before, it can be very difficult with samples, but with this one here, oh, Eric is here. Hello, Eric. But with this sample, there's a lot of material, and I would have liked to hear some of that material be used to fill out a little bit more sections that were a little bit more different than what we had here. And as well, it sounded like, I'm not 100% sure, but was there distortion on the... So with this beat, there's a lot of tilting towards the sort of higher frequencies, especially with that hi-hat. I'm not 100% sure whether there was some distortion added there, but it's a very bright beat. So what I would probably do to sort of test whether it's maybe too bright is grab, a nice trap vocal and add it on top and see if the vocals, if the hi-hat that you have here starts to interfere with how how the vocals cut through, because you might find that with the sort of frequencies of this beat here, it might be a little bit difficult for the vocals to actually cut through. So that's a test that you can always do. But yeah, nonetheless, really hard beat like you guys said, I agree there, and really smart production techniques in terms of adding that piano. I think I would have liked to hear something a little bit more beyond just the sort of initial idea that we have here. So yeah, I think Geisha, thinking back to your old beats, I'll keep an eye on this for next time, whether your beats sort of tilt towards the high end to the point where it might become a bit difficult for an artist to use. So I'll keep a note. Let's listen to Grout Daddy's beat here. All right, that was Grout's beat there, like you mentioned. First, first time using Ableton, I think you mentioned. Yeah, I made this in Ableton for DAW workflow. Yeah. Sean says this would be really easy to write rap cadence to. I like it. It's chill. How would I go about googling the song name? I don't know much about this genre, but I feel like the drums could hit harder. Says Ski. I want the kick to hit harder. It's a vibe, but I can't hear the sample in it, which is amazing. The style has weaker ambient drums, but there's another style with harder drums. The sample was used as a transition sound and was looped over to make a pad. Ah, cool little technique there. There's some quirkiness in the rhythm, which I was alluding to. So yeah, with this beat, really cool idea. I really like the sort of ambience to it and the ethereal textures. Like you mentioned, this was a genre that I personally am not that familiar with, which is vaporwave. I sort of got the impression that it was like very drone-ish. I think you said that yourself. Reminds me of almost like Brian Eno and stuff. It's a futuristic vibe, says Jor. So yeah, really, really unique approach here. I think the sort of core idea that you mentioned really came together. It's supposed to sound very spacey. I really liked the sort of uniqueness of all the textures and how the core idea sort of evolves to some degree throughout the beat. I will say though, with this beat, I am not familiar with the genre either. Like you mentioned, the style has weaker ambient drums. I wonder if the approach in terms of the drum programming, it felt a bit trappy in terms of the sort of hi-hat approach. So even if you just reduced the hi-hats, if you reduce the sort of amount of hi-hats in the beat and you chose more textured drums, just to play into the sort of ethereal vibe in terms of not having sort of very upfront and sort of aggressive drums, but they can still be used to take up a lot of space on the beat if you just use sort of colorful drums that hit less often. That could be an idea. But again, this sort of plays into sort of genre, and I'm just not familiar with it. For me, though, the sort of lack of something up front was a little bit distracting. Everything was sort of blending in together. It sort of felt like this was in between genres. So I think playing around with the drums could have easily alleviated that, and I'm sure you know this as well. So just bring up how pronounced the drums were, and if you want to make them sort of weaker and a little bit less upfront, they can be programmed in a different way where it doesn't have to have the sort of trappy hi-hat pattern. Yeah, maybe curious to hear what a different sort of beat in this genre would sound like, just because I'm sort of speaking out of ignorance here. Listening or thinking back to like the sort of drone ambient type of music like Brian Eno and stuff, even if you don't have drums playing throughout, if you sort of have a more jazzy approach in terms of like having drum hits sort of sparsely throughout the beat but still have them sound a little bit more forward, that could work as well. I think that's just the big thing. The drums as they were sounded somewhat drowned out, and even if they are programmed in a way they sound very rhythmic and they're supposed to sound very prominent, and yet the actual levels of them aren't. I think it's just something that I'm not used to hearing. But again, who knows, because I've never heard this genre, so maybe I'm speaking the nonsense. Whoa, that was an abrupt ending. Let me finish writing this down. All right, so that was Ski's beat there. I already did geishas there. Where did you say you can get that ozone again? So if you look in the Discord, I think I mentioned it a couple days ago. But just DM me if you can't find it, because I think I have the link somewhere. But yeah, with this beat here, with Ski's beat, I think with this approach of the sort of sampling here, it sort of reminds me somewhat of what I talked about with the sort of Timbaland's approach, where he takes shorter phrases, sort of a stabby approach, and tries to create something musical out of it. And he sort of builds a lot around the sample to really fill up space in the beat. I think with the approach that Ski did here, you did a great job in terms of the building around the entire sample. I really liked the sort of additional things that you built, especially the sort of percussive rhythmic textures. Really unique sound. I think that goes a long way in getting the beat to sound full. That was really smartly done. I think with my takeaway with this sample, though, it feels like the sample usage, the texture itself, personally, it just sort of felt a bit, I don't know what the right word is, discordant or a little bit off. I feel like the sort of musical feel to it was sort of the stabs that you chose, the different pieces that you chose with the sample. It sort of didn't really feel like the pieces worked well, but I'm not sure whether that has to do with my own tastes. This felt like a very sort of happy-go-lucky type of beat to me, at least, and maybe that's just something I'm not a fan of. Nonetheless, I think your approach in terms of building around the sample was very smartly done. I think in terms of the pieces that you chose, all right, Harmiter, I'll see you later. Hopefully you make a spooky beat. But yeah, with the pieces that you chose here, I think they just didn't really work well with one another. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Sharp says Eminem would kill that. Fast Rap or Busta Rhymes need a little bit more space in it. But yeah, that was my takeaway with this beat. Smart production ideas. It's just the actual pieces that were used from the sample. I think there are probably other textures or sort of ideas that may have resulted in something that feels just a little bit more cohesive musically, just because the samples or the sort of stabs that you chose here didn't really have a nice sort of resolution to them in terms of the sort of overall musical sentence that you built, if you want to put it that way. And we have Jor. Whoops. To finish up, we have Jor's beat here. All right, that was Jor's beat there. Yeah, just like MCI mentioned, is a really quiet sounding beat, so it made it a little bit difficult to actually judge. Still working on mixing and mastering, says Jor. I like the bass swells, says Chaz. The swells are definitely cool. The notes seem out of key too. Yeah, I picked up on that as well. So this beat, like I mentioned, it's hard to hear the actual beat just because it's a bit quiet. But from my takeaway, I think one of the things that I think Jory, you've been here the whole time, but which ones I felt that too, but I couldn't figure out. I think it was the sort of Jamaican percussive sound that you added there. These I can't remember what the hell that thing's called. That sort of drum, that Jamaican drum, that sounded like some of the notes were out of key. But with this beat here, like we talked about earlier with some of the beats, in terms of the drums, some of the beats that we listened to had very prominent, loud sounding drums that really filled up a lot of space on the beat, and that really helped the beat sound a lot more complete. Other beats, they sort of went a little bit more minimal with the drums, but they took the sample and really pushed it to the point where it took up a lot of space on the beat, and that also contributed in getting beats to sound a lot more complete. I think with the beat that you have here, you sort of didn't do either. The drums that you chose were very short and transient, not very prominent sounds at all, and the sort of textures that you used to build out the sort of musical components of this beat, also not very full, not very robust, just very minimal as well. And I think even if you did boost up the beat to be a lot more louder, that problem would still sort of stick around. I just don't think the material that you used here was enough to sort of get the beat to sound complete. I will definitely say I really liked the textures that you used, especially that sort of bell, the sort of main sort of short stabby, I don't know if it's like a bell or a synth. I really like that. It really sounded like a cool texture to sort of build your beat around. I think maybe adding a little bit of reverb to different sounds could have gone a long way, but like I mentioned, the sort of Jamaican drum sound was a little bit off as well. So I think the pieces that you have here, while they do sound nice, I think you'd have to go the extra mile to really push them to fill up a lot more space, whether that be, adding saturation, distortion, some reverb, just to play around with the 3 dimensions that I talk about in the course. The drum sounds as well, you could have done gone the extra distance to get those textures to sort of fill up more space in the beat. I've heard some of your beats before. I think you definitely have a good idea of how to put one together. With this beat, though, I think maybe you're not very used to sampling, but it's just like any other type of approach. At times, you can just treat it like yet another slew of instruments that you can use in order to get your beat to sound full, but those principles still exist, where you need to make sure, all your frequency spaces are filled up. You need to make sure that all your depth is completely full, the stereo spaces as well. All those different things that I mentioned in the course, the melodic variation, rhythmic variation, even if you do use samples, always think of those, keep those ideas in mind, because no matter whether you use samples, you program everything yourself, you use, MIDI, you use whatever AI to make your beats, all those principles will remain true no matter what you do. So always keep those in mind to get your beat to sound full and complete. So yeah, definitely some nice sounds in here, but I think they're all the sounds that you chose. They just need to do more to get your beat to sound full and complete. So that is this week's review. Sorry if I felt a little bit more low energy. I am still a bit stuffy, as you guys can hear. The next one's going to be the Halloween challenge. It was originally supposed to be on Halloween, but I'm going to have to push that. So it's going to be a November 7th Halloween for our stream. That's very stupid, but here we are. So yeah, thank you guys for showing up once again, and I will put the next challenge up. And just like I mentioned before, new stuff in the course. So if you are someone who wants to get some of those discounts, the instructions to get them are in the course. I just added those in, as well as a new SEO sheet if you want some more keywords and stuff. But yeah, thank you guys for showing up. And I'll see you guys next time. Ta ta. I think I'm going to go to sleep because I'm sick. Bye bye.